Good afternoon, everyone. We will be discussing the power of colonial oppression in the African continent and how different strategies have been utilized to counter it. Let us focus on the persisting effects of colonialism on the individuals and nations of this varied continent. We look back on the struggle for African independence with admiration and pride. From peaceful protests to guerrilla wars, Africans employed all forms of resistance to oppose colonial occupation. Possessing courage and resilience, Africans eventually overcame their oppressors, resulting in the rise of new nations and cultures. As the current generation, it is our responsibility to keep up the battle for justice and freedom. Resistance movements constituted a fundamental part of the African quest for independence. Various tactics were employed, from guerrilla warfare to civil disobedience, to counter-colonialism. The Mau Mau uprising in Kenya stands out as a particularly illustrious example of guerrilla tactics, while the Algerian National Liberation Front conducted a successful war of liberation against the French. Such movements were not only courageous and resolute, but furthermore, they acted as beacons of aspiration for African freedom fighters, ultimately leading to the continent's independence. Pan-Africanism is a long-standing movement that seeks to unite and empower people of African descent. It draws its strength from the struggles of African Americans and Africans around the continent. Through organizations such as the Pan-African Congress and the African Union, Pan-Africanism has provided a platform for Africans to fight against colonialism and racism, and work together for justice and independence. Its aim is to allow Africans to take control of their own destiny, to create a sense of unity and solidarity between African nations, and to bring an end to oppression and discrimination. Thanks to Pan-Africanism, African people have become stronger and better equipped to attain liberation and freedom. In 1957, Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African nation to gain independence from colonial rule. This momentous event was marked by courageous activism and nonviolent resistance, spearheaded by figures like Kwame Nkrumah, who served as an inspiration to others in the fight for freedom. Ghana's independence was of paramount significance, as it posed a challenge to the idea that Africans were unable to independently govern themselves. This set the stage for a new era of African leadership and self-determination, further inspiring other African nations to strive for their own freedom. The Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya was a significant part in African independence. Led by members of the Kikuyu ethnic group, the rebellion sought to counter the exploitation and injustice of British colonialism. Guerrilla tactics were used by the rebels to battle the colonial forces, yet it was met with a harsh response. Despite this, the rebels continued their fight and their acts of courage ignited other resistance movements across the continent. These actions were pivotal in paving the way towards Kenya's independence in 1963. Algeria's War of Independence was a protracted and immense struggle for freedom and independence from French colonial rule. The Algerian people were tireless in their pursuit of freedom, even in the face of severe repression from the French authorities. It all began in 1954, with a string of attacks on French armed and unarmed targets. In response, the French employed overwhelming force, including torture, mass detentions and summary sentences to try and put down the rebellion. However, the Algerians kept their spirit alive and never gave up. The war went on for 8 long years until Algeria's victory in 1962, finally granting the nation independence. Despite often facing discrimination, marginalization and gender-based violence, as well as limited access to education and resources, women across the African continent made remarkable and wide-ranging contributions to the fight for independence. These included providing financial support, organizing protests, and even taking up arms against colonialism. Despite the immense challenges they faced, their courage, resilience and dedication to the African independence movement should not be forgotten. Their invaluable contribution was instrumental in the success of numerous resistance movements. Colonialism had a significant and long-lasting effect on African nations. The effects can still be witnessed in persistent disparities and backwardness throughout the continent. Colonialism upended traditional African societies and economies, imposed alien languages, cultures and systems, and used natural resources and labor for exploitation. This has left behind profound disparities, which present-day African leaders and activists are trying to address. As we push for a better off and more equitable future in Africa, it is important to be aware of the persisting effects of colonialism and its influence on the continent. Against the backdrop of oppression in South Africa, Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress led the fight against apartheid. Mandela's selfless dedication to the cause was evident in his decision to risk his freedom for the benefit of all South Africans. This significant struggle ended in the abolishment of the unjust system. Mandela's vision for unity and reconciliation for the country was integral to the success of the movement, and continues to be a source of inspiration for people around the world to pursue social and economic justice. The end of apartheid in South Africa in 1994 was a defining moment in history, the result of decades of dedication from anti-apartheid activists both internally and worldwide, as well as international pressure on the South African government. At the root of this momentous event was the transcending leadership of Nelson Mandela. Imprisoned for 27 years, he emerged with a message of forgiveness and reconciliation which united people around the world in the fight for freedom and equality. Following his release in 1990 and election as South Africa's first black president 4 years later, the shackles of oppression were broken and a new era of democracy, human rights and hope dawned. Established in 2002, the African Union replaced the Organization of African Unity and has worked towards fostering unity and progress in Africa. With a strong emphasis on African autonomy and self-determination, it has been able to better respond to the needs and desires of African nations, achieving notable progress in the fight for a secure, prosperous, and equitable continent. Furthermore, it has taken the lead on addressing key issues such as climate change and gender inequality. People in Africa are characterized by their great stamina and dedication in their journeys to attain better lives. Unifying and uniting as one, they have been able to oppose colonization and have become an encouragement for the others throughout the continent. Collectively, they possess the capability to prevail over any hindrance that may obstruct the route to a society that is equitable and just for all. Cooperation and solidarity between countries around the world are essential to achieving African independence. Poverty, war and illness are still huge threats to many African countries, making external help from global partners even more important. Through mutually beneficial partnerships, backed by a shared commitment to achieving common goals, the international community can actively work towards a better future for African people. Our ancestors bestowed upon us a strong cultural legacy despite colonialism's attempts to erase our traditions. Culture was a form of resistance, granting us pride and a reminder of our history. Despite efforts to repress it, our customs were passed on to the next generations. Now more than ever, there is an urgent need to protect and promote our culture, as globalization and modernization try to obscure it. Africans can rise against neocolonialism by embodying their cultural identities and working towards a brighter, equalitarian tomorrow. Let us honor and embrace our culture as a source of solidarity and pride as we forge ahead towards a more desirable future. Leadership is of paramount importance in understanding, navigating and resolving the matters that have defined the African continent throughout its history, and those that continue to shape it today. A leader must possess a comprehensive knowledge base of African issues, a dedication to improving the collective welfare of people, and a willingness to be open to feedback and collaboration with others. It is only through ethical and inspirational leadership that all citizens, particularly those in difficult or oppressed circumstances, can have their voices heard and their needs met. Civil society has played an integral role in African independence, from grassroots activism to mobilizing people. It remains a formidable force for progress and democracy today. Civil society activists serve as inspiration to new generations of leaders, striving to make Africa more just, equitable, and inclusive. They are dedicated to creating a better and more equitable future, standing strong for what they believe in. Human rights are a universal concept rooted in African values and traditions. For centuries, Africans had their rights denied under colonialism yet persevered in their fight for life, liberty and equality before the law. Respect for human dignity and the rule of law continue to be paramount in the African struggle for freedom and are a critical component of forging a more equitable society. Economic development is of paramount importance for African independence. Sustainable and inclusive economic growth can work to reduce poverty, create jobs and enhance the living standards of many people in the continent. Nevertheless, there exist several challenges that need to be addressed, such as the heritage of colonialism, political instability and infrastructure deficiency. African countries should strive to promote trade, investment, and innovation to achieve economic development while confronting issues such as corruption and inequality. We must collaborate to make economic development happen and construct a better future. Africa's journey toward true independence requires peace and security as a primary necessity. To reach sustainable development and prosperity, it is imperative to resolve conflicts by recognizing and dealing with the underlying causes of social inequality, economic disparity and political exclusion. To this end, dialogue and negotiation should be promoted, along with the building of efficient conflict prevention and management mechanisms, so that Africa may secure long-term peace and advancement. African struggle for freedom and independence was an extraordinary event in history. People from all corners of the continent united to fight against colonialism, employing a variety of strategies to gain their own sovereignty, with both men and women at the forefront. Despite the obstacles in their path, they attained considerable success, paving the path for post-colonial African countries and economies to build a better future. Nevertheless, the challenge of Pan-Africanism and social and economic justice is still present in today's African landscape. We must stay optimistic and devoted in our mission to promote sustainable and comprehensive growth, peace and security, and respect for human rights. I want to close this meeting by thanking everyone for attending and taking this journey with us to discover African resistance and independence.